So hello everyone, welcome to this Sunya IAS session on high yielding topics which are going to help you in your preliminary examination 2023. Now, we are right now doing terminologies which are regarding modern Indian history. As you must be aware that in ancient and medieval history there are too many terminologies and they are discussed also in great detail, but as we have seen in past 2-3 years, the pattern has been that they will ask some word which was on the cusp of the medieval and the modern times, or from the British times also, British administration and all, and those are asked. Sometimes these are also related to some policy of there or something otherwise also, but those are known independently also, autonomously also, and therefore we have to read about them. So in that series only, in the previous lectures, we have discussed some of the important words or terminologies which were there in use during the freedom struggle movement. Then we also discussed some of the important terminologies during the time of Mughal administration and the Maratha administration. Okay, now we have to move and we have to discuss in detail about some of the words which are from the period of British administration or on the cusp when the administration moved from the Mughal time to the British time, those periods. Okay, so this is your lecture number 5 of terminologies. Let's move forward. Before starting the lecture, let me also tell you about the ongoing crash course of Sunya IAS, which is dedicated towards a preliminary 2023 examination. If you are serious about your examination, if you haven't checked out the course yet, make sure you do that. A good initiative by Sunya IAS, making sure that they are also providing you booklets which are very thin in size, making sure that you don't have to read too much in great detail, too much plethora of books before the preliminary examination, and you will get the concise form, everything to prepare for the examination. The video lectures are also there. You can check out the link below for the other details of the course. Now let's move forward and let's go to the class. So today's whole point is going to be about economic policies. Economic policies and its impact. Okay, so in British period, what really happened economic policy wise, those things we have to discuss, the keywords regarding it. So obviously when we are going to discuss about economic policy, the one of the major thing which about the British period, about their economic policy, was their revenue settlement system. What were the different methodology they used for revenue settlements? Okay, whether it was permanent settlement, Rayatwari system, Mahalwari system, okay, Talukdari system, Malguzari system, all this needs to be discussed. And as a terminology itself, each one meant a lot, and that's what we are going to focus first of all. There are few more other terminologies, for example, the very meaning of factory, what it is, okay, or the very word baniya, okay, which is used in common parlance in Indian society now as a caste faction, but it is something which traces its origin from Portuguese origins. So we will talk about that too, okay, in this lecture. Let's proceed. Let's start with the very first, the permanent settlement. I hope everyone must be aware of the permanent settlement. That was the first permanently decided means through which the Britishers decided to collect revenue from the Indian region, from the Indian British territory. Okay, now what you need to know here is this: why it is called as permanent settlement. So first of all, look, the origin of permanent settlement is there in Izaredari system itself. And Izaredari system is something we have discussed as a terminology in previous lecture itself. So I'm not going to go too much in detail. You can check it out in the I think so lecture number 2 of terminologies only. Now, in the Izaredari system, development of Izaredari system came when the Britishers got the reign of tax collection in 1765. After the Treaty of Allahabad, they got the control of tax collection right of the Bengal Suba. And immediately they also went on to impose Izaredari only. The only thing was, instead of Mughals, they were going to get benefited by the money collected. But now very soon they observed corruption. Okay, and after that everything they did between 1765 and 1793 were there the various attempts to reduce this corruption. For example, they came up with quinquennial system, where the annual Izaredars were given the land for 5 years in continuation. making sure, or as far as Warren Hastings was concerned, he thought that if the Izaredar will have the land under their control for 5 years in continuity, they will surely invest more in land, maybe for better quality of seeds, for better quality of fertilizer, for better quality of agriculture and farming. But nothing like this happened. And overall revenue collection in those 5 years of concurrential system was lesser than what otherwise would have the Britishers would have got just by the Izaredars if they would have taken money on the annual basis. And so you will see that although this concurrential system went from 1772 to 1777, they never introduced it again, and after 1777 it stopped forever. One important thing here again, Britishers at this point only appointed the Amini Commission. This commission you need to know separately also, because that was the first commission, okay, which was ever established by Britishers in India, and it was established with the very sole intention of trying to understand, trying to learn what is actually the monetary value of all the land in Bengal, to calculate the monetary value of land. For example, let me tell you this thing, and it will make sense to you. We live in a society where land is a very standard commodity. Everyone trades in land. It's a very standard thing. But back in the day, this was not the situation. You might not understand it because we live in such a society. But suppose, for example, if I tell you that I want to buy air, you will immediately laugh, and you will immediately might even say that हाँ ले लो 2 kilo हवा ले लो हमसे. So you need to understand over here that it sounds absurd to you, but if you will go in New York City, you will see many places there are taller buildings and there are high-rise buildings, and there are smaller buildings next to it. Many a time the smaller building, this one and this is the large building, the smaller building sells the space, the air above it to the larger building, and the larger building cantilevers itself on and above the smaller building. This happens, okay. So it's not that difficult also anymore that air is also sold. So similarly, the Britishers were the one who came up with this idea that you can commodify the piece of land, okay. So that was introduced by them through the permanent settlement only. What they exactly did, they were finding it difficult to understand whom to go to collect the revenue, and therefore they needed someone whom they can approach that okay, you are responsible, give us the revenue for this piece of land. And so you will see that after Amini Commission came up with the standardized values of land, another historian from that period only in 1778 1779 came up with this idea that why don't we introduce a system which is similar to the baronet system in England, okay, where each baronet owns their piece of land, as in sense that they are the proprietor. Now this idea sounded very good to William Pitt back in 1784. So immediately after he passed the India Act, which is famously called in the sphere of UPSC as Pitt's India Act of 1784. Immediately after that, William Pitt, you will see that he passed an order that yes, this sounds good. We should do what? We should make these zamindars, who are the local revenue collectors, as the ultimate proprietor of the land. So that was done. Okay. Now further details, further nitty-gritty of all the this permanent settlement was done by John Shore, who was then a member of Governor General's in Council while Lord Cornwallis was the Governor General. So 1789, John Shore provided a small point-wise or letter in which he propounded what needs to be done and how needs to be done, and subsequently based on it, when Cornwallis brought the Cornwallis Code in 1793, and remember Cornwallis Code is important because Cornwallis Code is the term using which India was governed till 1858. So Cornwallis Code had 48 regulations, and the regulation number 1 to regulation number 4 actually talked about this permanent settlement only. Okay, now few more things about permanent settlement which is important. Let me tell you here. Okay, now why it is called permanent? Because of two reasons. First of all, the zamindars became hereditary proprietor, but the British government had still the right to take back the territory, the land, if the zamindars are not paying their revenue on time. Plus, the amount which has to be paid was also fixed. And how the Britishers fixed it? They fixed it like this, that suppose in 1793 you are paying 10 rupees, and in 1853 ultimately you are going to pay 100 rupee, and that was nominal because every year some price rise would have taken place, so the price would have increased from 10 to 100. So Britishers said that let's do one thing, you pay us 50 rupees in 1853 also and 1893 also, continuously every year you pay us 50 only, so this amount is also fixed. Okay, now why this was done? This was done because Britishers were immediately in requirement of money, so they thought that we'll get so much money, let it be, later on we'll see what will happen. Later on if losses will come, we'll earn from somewhere else, but immediately we need money, and this is how we can get the money. And that was one of the bigger problem, because at that very time when usually they would have the permanent settlers, the zamindars would have to pay 10 rupees, they were now had to pay 50 rupees, so they found themselves it very difficult. Beyond this, the prices were divided into a ratio of 10:1. Okay, in many books you will see it written as that 1/11 part went to the zamindars and 10/11 part went to the Britishers. That is very meaning 1:10 or 10:11 if we're talking about British to native zamindars. That was the ratio in which the revenue which came from the farmers, actual farmers, was divided into. Okay, so that is all what the permanent settlement was about. Now, officially permanent settlement was applied in 1793 and ultimately it stayed there till 1947. Now, beyond this, you also need to know the areas where permanent settlement was applied. So, what were the areas which were in direct control of the Britishers in 1793? So, that was Bengal, Bihar, parts of Odisha, okay, present day parts of Odisha, present day parts of Jharkhand, and Northern Sarkar. Northern Sarkar is the coastline on West Bengal, on Bay of Bengal. Okay, some parts in Odisha, some parts in Andhra Pradesh. So that is the reason on which this was the main region on which you will see the permanent settlement was applied. Now, you will see later on the Northern Sarkar strip was included in as part of Madras Presidency, and therefore in many of your books, referral books which you will be using for your UPSC preparation, they will write it as if it was applied in Bengal, it was applied in Bihar, and it was also applied in the northern part of Madras Presidency. That is basically Northern Sarkar. Fine. So that thing you have to keep in mind. Fine. So that is all what you needed to know about permanent settlement. Now let's move to the next point, and that will be the next term, Raiyatwari system. Okay. Now, Raiyatwari is an anglicized form. Okay. Raiyat is a standard word for someone who is a farmer also. Okay. So the actual farmer is called as Raiyat, and that's where Raiyatwari word come from. Okay, so here the actual Raiyat is considered the points person from whom the tax is to be collected. Okay, so now why and where these ideas were implemented? Now, as I told you while explaining the permanent settlement, that look, for permanent settlement the Britishers introduced it because they needed someone whom they can ask for money. Arey, you can't just go around on road and randomly ask people for money. You have to first ascertain whose responsibility it was, who was the owner of the land, or who is using that piece of land, and then only you can ask for money. And they were finding it difficult to ascertain who that particular piece of land belongs to, and therefore they allotted it themselves. That's where zamindar community came in from, in the form of the proprietor of the land and not only the revenue collector of the land. In the Rayyatwari system, you will see there were regions where when Britishers landed up or they reached as an administrator, they found out that already there were records of people, the farmers, and therefore they realized that if there is already so much record of people, why the hell we need to appoint new people? If we already have, Britishers said that if we already have the records of the people who are actually farming on the land, then we don't need to appoint new zamindars from our side. And that's where Rayyatwari system came in from. Now what really happened is, you might have heard about the Third Anglo-Mysore War, which happened between 1790 and 1792. Okay, Third Anglo-Mysore War, which happened between 1790 and 1792. Keep that thing in mind. Now the second point, this is the first thing. Now, in the outcome of this was Treaty of Saringapatnam, where it was decided that half of the territory under Tipu Sultan of the Mysore state, and usually which was in the southeastern part, is going to be ceded to the Madras Presidency, or Madras Presidency was not there, but under the control of Fort St. George, that was controlled by Britishers in Madras. Okay, now that territory came under the control of the Britishers now. So in 1792, Britishers got control of this southeast part of Mysore. Okay, now when they landed up there, or their specific officer Alexander Reed, landed up there, he found out that Hyder Ali back in late 1760s itself has introduced this tax collection system, where the zamindars were removed as the revenue collectors and a new salary based employee system was introduced for revenue collection. And these people, the salaried employees for revenue collection, were actually the people who obviously will have all the records, all the details of people, otherwise how they'll work. So Alexander Reed now got control of a piece of land where they already had the records of people on the ground, and that's why they directly started collecting the revenue from the Rayyats only, and that's why Rayyatwari system was introduced. Now what is good, what is bad in the Rayyatwari system? First of all, one of the biggest thing which people think is good about Rayyatwari system was that now there was no more mediator, now there was no more zamindar. But that is actually not correct in the sense, because the loss on the other side was very big, because now the Britishers said that since there is no more a zamindar in between, we don't even have to give that one part of 1:10 ratio thing, and now so we can ask for even more revenue from the farmers than we usually expect from the permanent settlement. And you will see that even in the worst of the worst cases, there have been instances where the British government demanded more than 66% of the total net growth or net grown out product as the revenue from the Rayyatwari's area. Later on, you will see that Britishers introduced the Rayyatwari system also in the Bombay Presidency and regions of Sindh. And very late on, then they also introduced in some parts of Assam, the very region where Ahoms were living when the Britishers controlled it after 1829. You will see that they also introduced this very system over there. Okay, so Rayyatwari system was introduced in this manner. So you just keep this thing in mind. Now the third thing, that is Mahalwadi system. Now in the previous lecture, while in terminology section only, while talking about the Mughal administration and all, we have already seen that Mahal was a word which was used for village in Mughal times. Mahal was a word which was used for the villages in the Mughal times. Good, great. Now Mahalwadi system were introduced in those areas where the village was very developed, not in the sense but as an administrative politically. So there used to be a very powerful panchayat. if there was a very powerful panchayat, Britishers thought that instead of appointing zamindars, or instead of directly going to the individual farmers as in Rayatwari system, we can directly oppose the panchayats who own or who wield so much power on the ground, and they will make sure they will collect the revenue and they will pay the revenue demand of the whole village at once. This was called as Mahalwadi system. Now there were certain better things than permanent settlement in Mahalwadi system. For example, because the whole village had to pay the rent as once, so even in the worst of the worst cases, there was a sense of community among the people. But there was another problem, this which is also there in Mahalwadi system. This further boosted the position of certain families in the village. So you will see that dynastic politics was active back then on the ground also. So you will see that Sarpanch, and then Sarpanch's son will also become Sarpanch, and then there was kind of a local dynastic royalty which was established in the village level itself, and they also became very powerful. So that was also one of the problem of Mahalwadi system. Fine. A huge number of areas which were under the Mahalwadi system were in the areas of Madhya Pradesh. Okay, you will see a lot of area which were taken by from the Marathas by the Britishers after the second Anglo-Maratha war. After 1805, they also went in the Mahalwadi system. A huge amount of area in what we now call as Uttar Pradesh, back United Provinces, were also that came from the Mahalwadi system. You have to keep in mind. Okay. Now, Talukdari system. Now, Talukdari system is something which was introduced in immediate aftermath revolt of 1857 in Awadh Suba, or you can write OUDH, okay, whatever pronunciation you prefer. Okay, so what really happened? The Talukdar were the local officer of the Awadh Suba at the village level. The Talukdar was the official who used to maintain the taluk, the relationship officer between the villages, the Mahal, and the Subedar who was there in Faizabad. The relationship was maintained by whom? First Faizabad and then Lucknow, obviously, was the Talukdar. Now, you need to understand, you have removed the royalty from there. Okay, you removed Wajid Ali Shah and sent him to Calcutta. Okay, Begum Hazrat Mahal fought for some time during the revolt of 1857, and then she escaped to Nepal. Fine, you removed the throne, the powerful house of Awadh Suba. Okay, great. But that doesn't mean that everyone else who were just below them are also gone. And these Talukdar wielded again a huge amount of power, because they were the revenue collector in a sense on the ground. And now they had the money, they had the weapon training, they had the support of the people, they didn't have a job. So they obviously are going to get involved in militancy against the British administration. And the resolution for this British administration came up with the idea that bring in the Talukdar into the administration itself. And that is where Talukdari system came into being. That is, the Talukdar now became the, in a way, revenue collectors. Now, mind it, the Talukdar were not the zamindars. They didn't own any piece of land, but their position as the revenue collector was returned to them for next 30 years. And something very similar happened in Malguzari system also. Anyway, this happened in Awadh Suba after 1857. This is Malguzari, not Maguzari. Mal, M-A-L, Malguzari. Now, in the Malguzari system, you need to understand, after the third Anglo-Maratha war, for all practical purposes, the Maratha Empire ended. Okay, the Raja of Satara still stayed, but he didn't wielded any power after this. So in a lot of area, right from the central province, whose capital later on became Nagpur, okay, from that area to Vidarbha. Okay, all these areas were the places where the local officers were called as officials of the Maratha Empire were called as Malguzars. And Malguzars after 1805 itself started facing the difficulty, because now the Marathas were not the supreme power, so it was getting difficult for the Malguzars to get the revenue. And after 1818, the officially also they were removed from the position of revenue collectors. So now they were actually facing the same problem. That is, they had historically a job that they don't have anymore, and so they are going to retaliate. Britishers came up with the same logic here too, that bring these people also within the fold of the British administration. So Malguzars were here given the same role they were playing for the Marathas, that is of the revenue collector, and in certain cases Malguzars were also given certain judicial power. Not all the cases, but some cases. You will see in many cases the Deshmukh's family or many places also became the Malguzars. Okay, so that you have to keep in mind. This is where the Malguzari words comes in. So whenever you have to pick now that which area Malguzari was implemented, which area Talukdari was implemented, you will be able to do it very easily without have to mug up exactly the listing which otherwise a lot of aspirants used to do. Okay, that was the intention. So I hope this much was understandable. Now, a word you might have heard about is called as Orang. Now, in many of the book, you will see Orang is written directly as warehouse. Does it actually only means warehouse? So no. In Persian, Orang means the treasury, the royal treasury. Okay, right from treasury over the period you will see that when the Britishers came to India, they started ruling from their various factories. And I must tell you again, the British factories were not the factories of today. They were not the manufacturing center. There were कोई industry नहीं चल रही थी वहाँ. There were no steel plant in the British factories. British factories were basically something very similar to an SEZ, Special Economic Zone. Okay, what they had is warehouses. Okay, so the Indians who wanted to sell their products, their goods to the Britishers, they used to go to the British factory, okay, sell their product, and the Britishers then took that product to the European market or the Chinese market. Similarly, in many cases, the Britishers sent their merchants to the hinterland of India. The merchants brought the product in the name of British administration or British East India Company and brought it back to the British factory, from where it was sent to the Chinese and the European market. And that is the system they evolved around their factories. Okay, now obviously inside the factories what is going to be there? If basically they are a trade center where all the exchange is happening, so they used to have they need to have a huge number of warehouses, and that is what they had. These warehouses were called as Orang. Okay, but originally that Orang word was also used for the treasury. Okay, the treasury, the Toshkhana. Now this is not Banyan, this is Bania. Now the word Bania is used as a caste grouping in India even now. Fine, I hope everyone knows the trading communities are called as Bania. But where this word actually has its origin, so now that word is important because it has its origin in Portuguese word Banyan. Now Banyan in Portuguese means trading port, and this trading community people usually who are native and who are living therefore on these ports, trading ports which were owned or run by the Portuguese, but obviously natives were trading there. These people over the period of time by the natives started calling them, the other natives started calling them Banyan, and that's where the word Bania came in from. So you have to keep that thing also in mind. Okay, Mirasidar, we have few minutes back discussed about Rayyatwari system, And in the Rayyatwari system, I have explained you the effective, or the not effective, the ultimate as well as the immediate as well as the effective revenue payer was the tenant or the actual farmer. This farmer of Rayyatwari system was also called as Mirasidar. Now in this case, since the revenue was taken from this person, he was also made by the Britishers the proprietor of the land. Surely the size of the territory, the size of the land which was allotted or which they owned was very low or very less, but they were called as Mirasedar. Okay, that is, you have to keep in mind. Covenanted services. Okay, this is a bigger one. This is something related to civil services. Now, back in the day, we now have a examination for which most probably you are preparing, and that's why you're watching this. That is called as CSE. That is the Civil Services Examination. Okay, Civil Services Examination. Now, back in the day, this examination was usually called as CSS, and that was Covenanted Superior Services. Covenanted Superior Services. Now, where this word actually came from, and that's why it is we are talking about covenanted services. So basically, it comes from obviously the English hierarchy or English system of working. Back in the day, there used to be knights, and the actual implementation of the rule of law, which was established by the British monarchy, British crown, or later British parliament, on the ground has to be done by these knights. Now, these knights, for all practical purposes, were the representative of the state on ground. Okay. Now, these knights in 99.99% cases came from very senior, honorable, aristocratic households who already were interconnected with all the nobility, and therefore the state had no issue, no crisis in vouching for them. So state always took a stand for them, and obviously they, in reaction or in return, they acted as the representative of state on the ground. But now in case of India, Britishers had to appoint new people, or British East India Company has to appoint new people for doing the same task. Now the aristocracy is not going to come from anywhere. So since the aristocracy is not going to come, these noblemen of noble lineage or so-called noble lineage are also not going to come from somewhere. So Britishers, how the British East India Company is going to take their responsibility? Okay, fine. Before even sending them on the ground, the British East India Company has to recognize them as the representative. How they can do so? So they did so by signing an covenanted agreement. Okay, this was a covenanted agreement, that is, you have been given a list of features that look, this person is representative of the British administration or British East India Company's administration, and this is his task at hand. And that's where the covenanted word came into being. Okay, so that you have to understand. That is why it is called as covenanted superior services. Indentured laborers. Okay, this is also something very legal agreement based like. So basically the story of this word starts from 1833. So in 1833, the British government officially enacted the anti-slavery law. Okay, so British government declared slavery to be illegal. Made illegal. The British government gave 10 years, a whole decade, to implement these laws that slavery has to be illegal in the whole Commonwealth, in other colonies of the British administration or British government, and or the East India Company's control. So you will see by 1843, okay, slavery was made illegal in India too. Okay, slavery was made illegal in India too. Slavery was made illegal in America in 1865. I think you must be knowing it, because it was obviously the result of the end of the American Civil War and the victory of the northern side. And prior to it, back in 1808 itself, America has declared that they are not going to inlet or let any more slave trade happen on its coastline. So that America has already stopped in 1808, but the slavery inside of American territory was going on till 1865. Coming back to India and Britain. So in 1843, slavery was made illegal in India too. Or slavery of Indians was also made illegal, because where you are going to take them? The Americans have already stopped. The Britishers have already stopped in all their colonies. So that is impossible now. Slavery has been made illegal in 1843. Slavery being made illegal doesn't mean the demand for cheap labor is going to end. Ultimately, who are slaves? What their purpose they are serving? They are basically cheap laborers. They are basically cheap laborers, nothing else. They are basically cheap laborers. Now, these people now going to be employed by some other means. Obviously, they have to, because market economy otherwise doesn't work. And mercantilism made a system, or capitalist system made a system, developed a system under which you will see that the East India Company and other European companies also started doing an agreement with the Indian workers or Indian laborers. So suppose you are a tiller of land, you are a farmer who are doing farming on some other landlord's land. All you are getting is a meal in the morning, a meal in the evening. You don't have any job security, you don't own anything, and you don't even have security of your people around you. Under these circumstances, if someone comes to you and tells you that come with me, I'll take you at some place, you don't even know which place, I'll take you to some place where you should work for me for next 5 years. During that period, I'll pay you some sustenance wages, and post that I will allot you a piece of land on which you can live happily ever after. Won't you be interested in doing so? Obviously you will be, because here also after 5 years what you are going to do? Nothing. Most of the time you are going to be affected by Bedakli law. So here what happened? The Britishers started doing agreements, and through these agreements they provided a tenure of usually 5 years, in many cases 10 years, for which the Indians have to work for them. Once they were tenured, they were called as indentured. Fine. That's where indentured laborers came into being. Now the problem was, Britishers started taking Indians as indentured laborers all around the world, whether it was the Jamaican islands or the West Indian island like Jamaica, Dominican Republic and all those places. French Guiana, French East India Company took Indians. Then Fiji, Mauritius, okay, Madagascar, the east coast of Africa, all these places. But by 1870s you will see that those Indians now wanted the Britishers to give the piece of land which the Britishers have assured. Now the Britishers found themselves in a very difficult situation, because the local tribes of these places not wanted Indians to be there, and there was a real chance of a crisis happening between local tribesmen and the Indians who were immigrants over there. Whose doing was it? The Britishers. Who created such difficulties? The Britishers. And then the Britishers started creating difficulties so that Indians should return back, instead of asking for their land which have been assured to them back in the day. And that is where you will see somewhere around 1894-95, Gandhiji will come in and he will take a stand, at least in South Africa, in the region of Natal, for the ex-indentured laborers. Fine. So in that perspective also, ex-indentured laborers, and this word is important. Fine. So this is one such word you should keep in mind. Now, as I told you, now the next word is Khatbandi system. As I just told you, the ex-indentured laborers and the indentured word where it came from, the Khatbandi system is also something which is very similar. So basically, indentured laborer is basically an agreement which Britishers did with the local people to use their physical labor. But in many cases, Britishers did what? to make sure to dissolve or to hurt the Indian local industries, the Britishers started doing long-term effective agreements with the Indian handicraft workers. Okay, and obviously they used to give the terms something like, I will give you this much money for this much period, and you have to do all your handicraft work just for me. And it was not that the Indian handicraft workers had another option, because otherwise the administration was also in hands of East India Company only. So if they rejected, they have to face the brunt. The licenses would have been taken, they were not allowed to, some other problems would be created. Okay, under these circumstances, these people, these Indian handicraft workers were forced into signing a system in which their khata, their account book was closed, and that was called as Khatbandi system. And they have to work with the Britishers, they have to pay, they were forced to take lesser amount as advance payment, and you have to work for their handicraft. Now the whole handicraft was taken by Britishers, they had a monopoly, they retained the control on the prices of that handicraft work in the international market and earned all the money. And that is where the word Khatbandi came in from. Okay, because they were now, their account was now closed and regulated by the Britishers only. Okay, so this is very close to indentured laborers, and that's why we would have discussed it together. Fine. So yeah, this was all what you needed toward administrative purposes, I think so. Yeah, and that will be all for this very lecture. In the next lecture, we'll be discussing few more words, few more terminologies which will be helping you in your examination. Make sure to give a comment on this, whatever your feedback is, whatever you liked, disliked, whatever it is. And also make sure to like the videos and share it with other friends of yours who are appearing for this examination. Thanks a lot and have a nice day.